and welcome to our 10th episode of Rag Brag. If you are joining us today for the very first time, this is our series where we talk with industry leaders about the experiences and insights in building AI products. I'm Valeria Gomez from Pinecone, and I got my awesome co-host today, Arjun Patel from our Devil team. Hi, Arjun. How are you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's always a great day when we get to talk to actual customers using our products and we all get to learn together about how they work. Like Valeria said, I'm a developer advocate at Pinecone. My whole job is creating fun content, technical content, social content to help people understand how to use Pinecone and learn about all the things related to that. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Great. And together, we are both very thrilled to be joined by a very special guest today, Alex Bowcut, CTO at Hyperleap. Hi, Alex. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about our products and what we're doing, how we use Pinecone. You guys have been awesome for us. So yeah, I'm excited to jump into it.
And, I'm going to just give a little overview, but, Alex is doing an incredible work in the job search space with the AI. And we are going to be chatting about how AI is really now shaping the future of recruitment. We are going to talk about the latest product, Jennie Johnson, and more. So just kind of get started and maybe some kind of housekeeping kind of rules. We have enabled the Q&A. Please, if you do have a question for Alex or for Arjun or for me, please use the Q&A session so it's easy for us to keep track of those questions. If you want to comment or you want to react, please use the chat section. And we also enable the reactions if you want just to share how you're liking this conversation. Well, now it's all you about Alex. Alex, is always fascinated to hear, about the personal journeys behind the tech, right? I think that's the part of my work that I love the most, kind of connecting with the person and learning about them. So what about you just share a little bit with us the overview of your role at Hyperleap and really what attracted you to the company and the job search space?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give some background on kind of what Hyperleap is as a company and what I do there, as well as the product that I think we're going to talk about the most today. So I'm the CTO at Hyperleap, so I oversee the software engineering efforts for the different products that Hyperleap works on. Right now, our main product that we're focused on building, or I guess more generally, all of our products have mostly been in the job search recruitment space. So that's been our expertise. The company has been around for quite a while, and I've been with them for around 2 years now. So the product that we're focusing on right now, though, in the job search space is called Jennie Johnson. Um, so it's like an anthropomorphized AI name, right, for a product, and the product itself is like an AI career coach, or you can think of it as like an AI focused, consumer focused job board. So I think everyone's familiar with, or most people are familiar with LinkedIn or Indeed or ZipRecruiter, these job boards where you can go, you search for jobs that you're interested in, you can apply, sometimes directly through Indeed or LinkedIn, or sometimes you go to the company's own website to apply. And yeah, these are very common, obviously. And, we were looking at these types of websites and the way that these websites work, the way that they generate money, right, is they take money from a company like Amazon, for example. Amazon pays them to post their jobs on Indeed, and Indeed drives traffic to those jobs. So Indeed or ZipRecruiter, these job boards, their focus is on companies, right? They want to make sure that companies get applicants, get people looking at their jobs. And we saw an opportunity to have a job board that's focused on the job seeker themselves, right? So instead of serving you up jobs that showing you the jobs that pay us the most money. We don't want to take money from companies. Instead, we want to work directly for consumers. So we want to show you the best possible job matches and help you as the job seeker as much as we can to help you land the position that you actually want. So we felt like there was a real opening, especially with generative AI, everything that was happening in this space, to kind of flip the script on a traditional job board where companies are kind of the applicant is, has to do whatever the company says, and they're really at a disadvantage. We wanted to try and flip that so that the applicant has some sort of advantage. So day to day, I oversee the engineering efforts for this product, and from like a from the high end, like making architectural decisions, and then also on the low end, and looking at pull requests and making commits in the actual code. So that's a bit about me and about us, I guess.
Great. And we were talking about the other day about your background in computer and electrical engineering, right? And I really want to know what drew you especially to AI and machine learning, right? You have a different kind of background. And so what was that kind of that moment of that project or even that conversation with someone that said, okay, I really want to start exploring this field?
Yeah, I think so. In college, doing electrical engineering and computer engineering, it's very math heavy, and I always enjoyed math. I when I started college, I was kind of under the impression initially that I wanted to major in mathematics. I'm glad I didn't end up doing that, but that's something that I really enjoyed. And so machine learning, especially, but artificial intelligence more generally, I guess, is very it's high performance computing, very mathematic, rigorous type of science. And so that was attractive to me even in college. So I took like a 400 level intro to AI class where we talked about some deep learning things, some artificial intelligence things. So that was very interesting to me. And then leaving college and starting out, working my first jobs, I was working on part of what I was working on was like CUDA drivers, like writing code for GPUs essentially, which if you're keeping up with the Gen AI space, that's become very, very important. At the time, it was, CUDA was a little bit newer and it wasn't quite, no one knew the takeoff that NVIDIA was going to have, but it turns out that was a very useful thing for me to be looking at the time. And so my job wasn't exactly machine learning or deep learning, but I was kind of on the outskirts following along with it and following along with the research, reading papers, and experimenting with things like transformers as they came out, became more popular in 2020 and 2021. And so I think, yeah, I was attracted to it, like generally attracted to it just because it's such an interesting field, obviously. Like you say artificial intelligence and for someone who wants to build something, you're like, that sounds amazing. I'd love to spend time working on that. But then deeper, once I started to dive, excuse me, once I started to dive into the actual, how would you make something like this work? That's exactly what I enjoyed doing, which was writing software, high performance software that's very, mathematically backed. And so that was attracted to me really quickly. And I've tried to, you know, keep up with it as much as I can. Obviously, it changes very quickly, especially now. But it's been a great ride over the last 8 years or so.
For sure, it's an ever-changing field, and that's why we're having this conversation, so everybody can learn from each other. And now, kind of switching the light a little bit now into Jennie Johnson. Job search, and I think it's something that everybody here in this virtual room can relate to, right? There are so many pain points, and but maybe for those listeners who may not very familiar with maybe with the job boards, as you mentioned, or the recruitment tech, maybe can you help us paint this picture for them of the problems in the industry that you saw that really Jennie Johnson is trying to solve?
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of twofold. So you have the traditional job board problems, which I kind of already talked about, which is job boards inherently are motivated to serve their customers, which are the companies. And so they're not focused on providing the absolute best experience for you as a job seeker, which is fine, right? That's their business model. And they're not doing like a terrible job at it. But we felt like there was a real opening there where someone should be focusing on the job seeker, right, and giving them as much as they could. And then the other side would be these changes with AI. Companies tended to lean into that really quickly um, in the recruitment process. So even before AI, I guess they're using ATS systems to weed people's resumes out, right? They do simple like keyword analysis to try and find resumes that are good matches. And I understand why companies want to do this, but it's not a perfect science, obviously. If you might have the experience that someone is looking for, um, that a company is looking for, but if you forget to put those exact keywords in the way that the company wanted them on your resume, you might never get a call back, right? And so things were getting harder and still today are getting harder and harder, I think, for applicants to get the attention that they honestly deserve from these companies. I think companies are missing out on really great applicants because they didn't put the right combination of keywords, right? The resume didn't look exactly how the company was looking for. And so that was another fundamental piece that we looked at when we started to build Jennie, was like, well, we would love to give people a way to feel more secure when they make an application, that they've edited their resume or their cover letter or both, to make sure that they're putting the words in there that are going to get them past that initial, recruiting or HR ATS system.
Speaking of kind of keyword search and finding things based on the queries that you're passing, I'd love to get into exactly how Jennie Johnson is able to get people the jobs that are relevant to them. You've already mentioned that a lot of existing job providers like LinkedIn, Indeed, so on and so forth, really focus on keyword search and then also like sponsored ads. So the job results you get are kind of influenced by both of these aspects. And when you use Pinecone, you can kind of enable semantic search, which allows for some measure of relevance. Can you explain why you couldn't get this goal of getting people their relevant jobs just with keyword search, and maybe how you're able to use semantic search and Pinecone to achieve this objective?
Yeah, so I think full text search, like traditional full text search, it does an okay job for what it does. And we still use full text search on our site. For example, if you go to jenniejohnson.com and just search in the search box for software engineering jobs, we're using full text search there. But for a better experience, like if you think about someone's resume or your resume, breaking that down into just a bunch of keywords, you lose a lot of value there. You lose a lot of information about a person. I'd like to think me as a worker, as someone who's in industry, I'm more than just like a pile of keywords, right? Like my experience is more than just like a bunch of keywords. And so we had experimented with semantic search, and I had in like my own time, starting in like 2020, and it was very, this was before, GPT had launched or anything like that, quite a while before then. And so things were still early on, but I remember we were embedding just sentences. That was kind of the biggest chunk you could do at the time. And we're really excited. We were really excited. We're like, wow, this is amazing. We're getting really cool results, by using these embedding models based on transformers. And so, yeah, I guess we kind of, in our search process, we have two things, right? We have job descriptions, which is what we're searching through. And then we have you as the applicant, like, what are you looking for? And so, yeah, breaking both of those down just into bunches of keywords is not great. If we could take someone's resume, right, all of their experience and everything, and try and boil that down into a semantic embedding, and then take job descriptions, which can also be quite long sometimes, and boil those down into a semantic embedding. It seemed like, just from the outside looking in, before we had done any of this, like, it seems like that would be a really good fit. Like we could match better. This job description is very similar to this resume, and that would be a much better match than just being like, hey, this resume says JavaScript, and so does this job description. So that's a great match. Like, obviously, there's a lot more that goes into a good match than just the keywords. And so we saw semantic search as a way to get into that. And yeah, we started build, like, we had a hunch that it would work, and it turns out it did work. So that was, yeah, it was good.
That's a great place for us to get to our next question. So you mentioned that because you're able to see like the qualifications maybe of a candidate or their previous experiences and align them with the body of these job descriptions, that might make like a meaningful difference in the way that candidates engage with the job postings that you have. So we'd be really curious to hear about, since you did flip on this like semantic search type feature inside Jennie Johnson using Pinecone, how did you know that it actually worked for your clients? How did you know that it was helping you achieve some difference in some metric? Maybe what was that metric and how did you measure that over time?
Yeah, so the way Jenny actually started was, we have some of the other projects that we work on at Hyperleap are like job alert emails, right? Where we have a database of applicants and a database of jobs, and we send email alerts once a day or once a week or whatever, and people click on those jobs. And so that was kind of a built-in way when we were looking at specking this out. We thought, well, here's an easy way for us to be able to compare stats, right? We'll have a version that we send out using full text search like we do today. And then we'll have a version that we create using semantic search. And then we can compare the click-through rate, essentially, right? How often are people looking at these emails and clicking on the jobs that are in them? Because that's a really good way to kind of democratize, is this good content or not? You're not actually you don't need to like ask them and trust them to give you accurate feedback. They're telling you just based off their clicks, they're just going to do it if they like the job. And so the way Jennie actually started was initially as like a job alert email. That was like the very first edition of it. And we had quite a bit of experience with, like we knew what the click-through rate for full text search looked like. We've been doing this for quite a while. So it was pretty easy for us to compare. Here's what the click-through rate looks like for Jennie using semantic search compared to some of these other properties we have that are using full text search. And we saw, yeah, I mean, pretty soon into it, we saw a market improvement where, semantic search isn't perfect every time either, right? There's still times where it doesn't deliver perfect results. It's not a silver bullet necessarily, but definitely on the average, we were seeing a higher click-through rate and something where immediately we're like, we should keep iterating and see if we can get this better and better. Because out of the box almost it was better.
So that's a really great way for us to understand how you were able to compare full text search and semantic search. We'd really like to hear how you were able to pick Pinecone as the way to fuel your semantic search solution and how you knew that that solution was the best fit for your organization.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess we were evaluating vector databases. It's been a little while since we were evaluating them, so the landscape has changed a little bit. But at the time, we looked at Pinecone and we thought, well, first of all, I guess we looked at our traffic pattern. So, like I said at the beginning, Jennie was just sending these job alert emails. That was like, I mean, there was a front end website you could use, but mainly it was these job alert emails. And that traffic pattern is very like we build the emails in the morning. So we have a lot of queries that are being made in the morning. And then throughout the day, we make less queries because the emails have already gone out. And so we looked at that traffic pattern, and something that attracted us to Pinecone was the ability to scale to really high number of queries, and then not have to pay the same, have massive machines running to support those huge amount of queries all day, every day, when we really only needed it for like 2 hours or whatever in the morning. So that was kind of the initial thing. Was like, we don't want to have to handle this like scaling and downscaling. And I think that's true for a lot of businesses that they look at their traffic patterns. Like you would prefer in the middle of the night, maybe in the US, it'd be better to not have like a bunch of a bunch of servers running when you really don't need it. And so from a cost perspective, both from like saving costs on infrastructure, but also saving costs on DevOps resources to manage scaling or manage resources, that was an obvious fit. And then there's the performance, and excuse me, we saw good performance with Pinecone. Performance both meaning like query latency or query throughput, and also performance being like recall, essentially like the quality of the responses that we were getting. And so, yeah, it seemed like a really good more hands-off approach we could take where we could trust Pinecone to take care of some of these details for us, and that we're still going to get good results. And we could focus more on kind of the core of what we were trying to build, the product itself, instead of, tinkering with the vector database all day.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair. Allowing us to kind of handle your search capability lets you figure out how clients should interact with your software, which is where a lot of your value is being driven anyway. Speaking of that, earlier you described how your search works, and there's a little bit of an asymmetry in the search. You might have someone's resume, which could be several pages long. Like you said, it could be a CV, like 20, 30 pages long. And then you have job descriptions, which might need to be chunked up in a certain fashion in order to be indexed in a vector database. Could you explain like how you are taking these two different forms of data, which might need different forms of data processing, in order to do this type of relevancy search to get the things that are important for those job seekers?
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. It's not a trivial thing to, comparing like job descriptions to other job descriptions would be more straightforward, or like comparing smaller chunks of text to other chunks of text that are the exact same would be more straightforward. So we did spend a fair amount of time working on how do we go from a user's resume, which, like you said, it might be a CV, it might be 20 pages long worth of experience, and then compare it to job descriptions, which might be a paragraph, or sometimes they might be, you know, 15 paragraphs, depending on the company. So for I guess we took two different approaches for the two different ends of that. So for candidates, we thought when we would read through people's resumes, we thought, I think you could take this 20-page CV and we could have a generative AI model pick out the most important pieces of it and put it into a small, like a few paragraphs instead of having 20 pages, right? Something more manageable that we could actually embed and get useful results out of. So that's a path we took for people's CVs was kind of like using a generative AI model to keep all of the important stuff that's in your resume, but take out some of the pieces that maybe aren't so important. For example, like the dates that you were at a particular job or something, not necessarily as important for matching as like what you were doing at that job. And to say like a job from 20 years ago that you had is probably not quite as important as a job that you've had for the last 5 or 6 years. So that's the side that we took with candidates, and then with job descriptions we went with just like a classic chunking approach. So breaking up the job descriptions into chunks of text that we could embed and get better results out of. And then from there, we still have that asymmetry that I guess you mentioned, where like they're not the exact same corpus of text, but the matching, I think if you imagine it in your head, you can imagine how it would actually work quite well. If you yourself wrote a succinct, 2 paragraphs about your professional history, it would look something like a job description for your dream job, I would think, right? Or at least a job you would be very good at. So yeah, that's the approach that we took. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and that's like not trivial either, right? Because you need a nice way of compressing the information from the CV, and then you're going to embed that representation again in order to do this type of search to find the things that are important to your candidates. And I'm sure that as candidates navigate through your website and as you're able to see like what people are clicking on and what jobs they end up clicking out of your website to, you can use that information to kind of grade the quality of this like compressed embedding in addition to like the search that you're doing. So that's another way for you to kind of measure. I imagine that's how you go about evaluating that part in production.
Yeah, there's lots of different, like anything to do with machine learning, I guess. There's so many metrics for us to look at and so much data that we collect and that we look at. And yeah, I think we're constantly adding new changes to how we're serving up search results to try and show the most relevant and the best jobs for people. It's definitely not, a finished science. Like we're still figuring it out and adding things on. But yeah, the metric, being able to track those users' behavior and giving good search results to begin with, so they're likely to engage with it at all, is honestly kind of a big mountain, right? If a user does an initial search and they get bad results, they're pretty likely to just bail and just be done. And so you need to have at least a decent offering at first to pick up these later metrics.
Great. I do have one more question before we kind of get into the Q&A session. So you've kind of described a vision of job hunting that involves more flexibility than just looking for keywords for the job titles that you're interested in. You're developing a sense of what candidates are trying to look for and what they bring to the table, and align that with this database of jobs that you already have. So when you think about like artificial intelligence technologies like vector database search, semantic search, and platforms like yours, how do you think job hunting and career development is going to change going forward? And how does Jennie Johnson plan to support candidates who are going to keep job hunting using your service?
Excuse me. Sorry if you can hear my dogs
No, no, you're good.
yeah, so I think this is definitely an industry that's changing quickly on both sides. Like we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but the recruiting side is changing really quickly. These companies are adapting quickly and trying to use Gen AI, and many of them are probably Pinecone customers as well. Um, and then us on our end and the other companies that try and do things that are serving the job seeker, we're trying to keep up as well. It's hard to know exactly where it's going to go. There's so many things up in the air, but I could certainly see analogous things to like dating, for example. So like, I think it was the CEO of Bumble talked about, she thinks the future of dating is like your AI talking to someone else's AI to see if it's a good fit so that you don't have to spend your own time just doing that initial, like, hey, is this a good fit at all? And I think maybe recruiting and job searching is going down a similar path where you, as the job seeker, you have Jennie Johnson to rewrite your resume, write a cover letter, right? Give you all of these resources for you to do the application. And if you get approved, maybe there's an initial conversation that is between your AI, maybe something you could build with Jennie that represents the professional side of you, and with the recruiter's AI. And I guess the recruiter's AI side of it has more press right now. There's a few companies that are picking up press because they're trying to make the first interview for a job be not with a person but with an AI. And so yeah, I guess we're fighting back on the other side. We're like, we want to make sure if companies are going to use it, generative AI to their advantage, the job seekers should do it as well. So kind of this cat and mouse game of going back and forth. So I don't know exactly where it's headed. I think we're at Jennie, we're just focused on serving job seekers right now the best that we can. And as the capabilities change over the next 5 years, which they obviously will, we'll be positioned and we'll be in a great spot to be able to adapt and keep serving the job seekers as best as we can. So that's core to pretty much every conversation we have at the company, and every decision we make with the product is how do we help our customers, how do we help job seekers keep up and not be at a massive disadvantage to these companies, where yeah, see job seekers are submitting thousands of resumes and not getting any callbacks, or having to do interviews with AIs and not feeling like they get a fair shake.
Yeah, that's why that is still the human component that still Jennie Johnson has is so important, right? We cannot just automate everything. We're still humans. Um, and I want to, I want to ask you before we go into Q&A about, some tips and tricks for the audience. But before I do that, I do have a poll for them because I would like to know what kind of challenges they are facing or they have faced while building with the AI. So please take a moment to let us know. So what is your biggest challenge in building with AI right now? Or what was the biggest challenge that you saw when you were building? Either it was access to quality data, or either model accuracy and performance, or just truly highly cost or budget constraints. Take a few moments there while we give Alex a few moments to think about those tips and tricks from his experience building Jennie Johnson and working at Hyperleap and his whole journey.
Yeah, Alex, we would love to hear if you have like any one or two recommendations for what people should be thinking about when they want to implement something like semantic search, like you're describing, or if you have like a particular war story of like something interesting that you figured out when you were trying to evaluate your solution that really helped you move forward and bringing it to production.
Yeah, I would say like the main kind of the aha moment, I already touched on it a little bit, but this was before we started using Pinecone, but we were playing with embeddings and doing like cosine similarity ourselves. That was definitely a big aha moment of like, this is going to unlock something really massive, not just for us, but for everyone. We're looking at semantic search and we're like, this is going to be amazing, right? This is going to unlock some things that you just could never do with full text search before. And then as far as tips and tricks for building something, I think iterating is important, and trying to understand your tools is really important as well. So if you just take the first embedding model you can find and embed, big corpuses of text, and then put it in the Pinecone and search it, you're not going to get the best results. In the same way, even with a full text search database, if you're not doing things like boosting, you might not get the best results. And so the way that we've found success is through iterating and looking at, all right, what's the right size of input? How many tokens should be going in for these input chunks? What embedding models should we use? What sort of re-ranking process should we be doing after we get the data back out? And it's kind of all those working in parallel give you something that can be way better than full text search. But it's different depending on like what worked for us here with the type of data that we're working with. Certainly could be very different than your data that you're working with. So I think the only like general answer I could give would be just to iterate, like have metrics that you're tracking so that you could try and understand the eval, right, of how things are working, which can sometimes be a little bit difficult, and evals aren't perfect, obviously, but some sort of eval that tells you how it's doing, and then iterate until you start to find something that's working, and then continue down that path. And I think that's, yeah, the first 3 or 4 months of when we were working with Pinecone was very iterative for us, where our indexes were changing, we were bringing up new ones, we were trying new things, we were using different embedding models, and trying to find something that worked well for us until we eventually found it. So yeah, if you go into it with the hope that like it's all just going to work out of the box in like an hour, then you might be a little bit disappointed. But as long as you go into it understanding that you need to iterate and spend a bit of time working on it, but once you find something that works, you can stick with it, then I think there won't be any problems.
Yeah, let me share those results from the polls. Let me see if you can see it. So yeah, about 50% of the folks are saying that, yeah, access to quality data, 38% about model accuracy and performance, and I think that ties really nicely with your tip. Just really iterate, try, experiment until you try to get it right. And only 13% just mentioning high costs. Thank you for
And that makes
sharing
a
your
lot of
experience.
sense, right? Like having the best data is going to help you like do whatever application you want really well. And as Alex has explained earlier, with their company, they were able to kind of take an existing data source that they have to understand a baseline level of performance, and then add something like semantic search in order to compare like how well that is working. So using your existing domain expertise has a lot of benefit for you to apply something to, rather than just like coming up with a solution out of thin air. So that's super cool, and that makes sense as that being the number one challenge for people.
Should we go to Q&A right now?
Yeah, I think it's Q&A time. We got a ton of questions in the chat in the
We
Q&A box.
do. You do. Arjun, do you want to help me take those?
Yes, let me dig through a little bit. Cool. It looks like Daniel has submitted a question about click-through rate, which I think would be interesting for us to discuss. The question is, CTR is a great metric to use, but how do you know about the quality of the candidates from the hiring end? And are the people who are hiring on the platform get better candidates, and are there metrics around that? So, Alex, this might be a good opportunity for you to clarify where kind of your product ends in terms of the job search pipeline.
Yeah. So Jennie, like I mentioned it kind of in passing, I guess, but Jennie doesn't work directly with companies that are posting jobs. We don't take money from any of them. And so applying through Jennie for a job, part of the resources that we give you are like, here's an array of online sources where you can submit a resume, right? Maybe on the company's own page, maybe they have a LinkedIn job posting that you can submit something through. So it's not easy for us to get that information back from employers on how the candidates are looking for them. For some of our job alert emails, we do get that information back kind of indirectly because obviously the partners we work with, they want people applying for their jobs, and they want people who are going to actually get the job. And so typically in those other products, we'll hear from our partners. They'll be like, hey, we're getting applicants that like aren't fit for the job, and we're never going to hire them. So like, what are you doing? And we never received any feedback like that. So we don't have really granular metrics into it. But at the same time, we are just trying to serve the job seeker. So if we send you a job that maybe you're a little underqualified for, but you're still interested in, I think that's still useful information for us at Jennie. And I think it's still useful information for you as a job seeker. Part of what Jennie offers is a resume analysis telling you what's missing from your resume to get whatever job you're looking for or looking at. And so you can get that useful information there as a job seeker of like, oh, I really want this job as a senior iOS engineer at Meta, but oh yeah, I'm missing like I need more experience with Swift, and I need this and this, and then I could actually get it. And so that's still useful information for you as a job seeker. So I guess that's a non-answer, but that's kind of the best we can do.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Like even with platforms like LinkedIn, even when you hit apply, they don't necessarily have attribution directly to the company that has put on that posting. So you can only do so much with the data that you have. The second part of what you described touches on Steven's and Daniel's question as well, which is additional like capabilities and uses of AI to help people better prepare for the applications that they're working on. It looks like Steven is asking about like rewrites, like helping people tailor their resumes to job descriptions. And Daniel's kind of asking about, and maybe even a more interactive approach where you kind of interview clients directly and ask them things that they're looking for in jobs in order to kind of construct the search that you're trying to do. So could you talk about like what Jennie Johnson allows you to do with regards to like job material preparation now, and then maybe what you're planning to implement later? I think it's worth also describing that a lot of these solutions sound a lot like retrieval augmented generation, which is this idea that you're doing search over your data set and then you're doing some sort of generative response over those search results. So hearing about whether that's something that Jennie Johnson would do next would be interesting to us as well. A lot of questions there, but go ahead and take whatever pick you want, Alex.
Yeah, I think I'll start and stick with what Jennie does today to begin with, so that everyone is clear on kind of what Jennie's offering is. So Jennie, you can get a subscription to Jennie Johnson, and what that includes is a certain number of resume rewrites where we do exactly what Daniel or Steven, whoever it asked, was saying. We rewrite your resume directly for whatever position you're wanting to apply for. So we're going to make sure, to the best of our ability, obviously we can't put things in your resume that you don't have any experience with, obviously, but to the best of our ability, we'll rewrite your resume so that it's in a format for ATS systems to even read it. That's honestly kind of a big hurdle for a lot of people, is the ATS can't, for whatever reason, can't even parse the text that's in their resume. And so you're definitely not going to get a callback. So we give you a resume that's definitely going to be ATS parsable and has the keywords to the extent as possible, as much as we can, to you to pass the ATS. And also included in that is a custom cover letter. So, and we have your resume on file and we have the job, so we can write a pretty good cover letter for you to send with your application, as well as an email message, right? Something you can send to the hiring manager through email. We also give you, I mentioned the application sources, like here are the places on the internet where this job is posted and where we recommend applying for it, and kind of how you might apply, because the job market is competitive right now, and just auto applying on Indeed or LinkedIn is frankly not. I mean, there's plenty of people who find jobs from it, but if there's a job you're really interested in, you want to go that extra mile. You want to be applying in the places where they're actually going to look at your resume. And you also want to be talking to people like on LinkedIn, right? You want to connect with the right people on LinkedIn. And that's something else that Jennie offers, is a kind of a snapshot of, here's some people who work at the target company, the job you're looking at. And that might be the hiring manager, or might be your direct manager, or work in HR or something like that. People on LinkedIn that you can reach out to and connect with. So Jennie is not currently not a tool that's like, hey, just give us your resume and we'll auto apply to 10,000 jobs for you. It's more of a tool for the really genuine job seeker who has jobs that they're really interested in, and they want to make sure that they get a fair shot at getting these jobs that they're interested in. So they'll rewrite the resume just for this job. They'll submit a cover letter. They're adding people on LinkedIn, right? Connections to try and talk to them to make sure that they get a real interview for the job. So that's Jennie's emphasis right now. And then as far as RAG applications, that is something we're working on as well. Something we would offer to our paid subscribers, which is, here are the search results that we get from Pinecone, for example, jobs we think are good fits for you. And then we'll have something like a curate search results button, or something that you could click, and we'll use RAG to use a generative model to go through, those 500 search results, take your resume, take the job description for all of those, do a comparison, and re-rank essentially, and show you like, here are the absolute best picks for you, using something more like RAG. And so that's definitely on the roadmap for us. And then going even further down the roadmap, it's hard to say. Like I said, we just want to serve the job seeker. So whatever feedback, like I would love for everyone in here to try the product, obviously, and give us feedback. And we listen carefully to our user feedback, and we're willing to take the product wherever job seekers find the most value out of it.
We have a few more questions we can talk about. A few of them are a little more technical. Martin's asking about some more detail with the semantic embedding strategy that you're using for the searches. So we know you've mentioned previously that we have this asymmetry. You're doing this transformation on the input query, which is going to be the resume of people who are using the platform, and then you have job chunks that you're kind of finding and aligning. Maybe you can talk about how you're chunking up those job descriptions. Job descriptions tend to have a really specific structure. There are like requirements at some point on the bottom, or maybe a company description. Maybe are you taking advantage of that structure in order to chunk those chunks differently? Maybe you can talk about the models that you've decided to use, or the other parts of the architecture that could be relevant. Whatever you'd like to talk more about, Alex.
Yeah, I think so. We use OpenAI's embedding models. I think I'm fine to say that. There's lots of people use them, and I think when we were evaluating embedding models, which ties into this question, what we were looking at was chunking is fine, and we do chunk like you mentioned, and I talked about. But actually, in an ideal world, we don't want to chunk it all, right? We just want to give the entire job description or the entire CV to an embedding model. And if embedding models could handle it, which they can't today, but hopefully eventually they could give us back, a 3,000 dimension float array, and that would represent the input text well. So like that's when we were evaluating, we're like, that's the path that we'd like to go down eventually. This chunking thing we see as a stopgap. It's what we would actually like to do, because no matter how intelligently you try and do chunking, there's obviously some data that's going to be missing from some of the chunks. And so that's when we're evaluating models, we're looking not just at like recall, meaning like how well they were able to find similar chunks, but also how big were the chunks that we could use it on before the model started to degrade. And we found that OpenAI's models were doing the best job, and we think today are still doing the best job as far as biggest inputs to an embedding that still holds that data. And so, yeah, we do chunk today. We look for if the job description will fit in the number of tokens that we found that OpenAI's models perform well on. We'll embed the entire job description. If not, we'll try, we chunk it up. We put overlapping sections in each of them. We put metadata about the job into all of the chunks, right? So that they have some metadata about the underlying job in case, the job at the bottom might not have, or sorry, the job chunk at the bottom might not have the job title necessarily or something. So there's metadata that we put in there. But yeah, it's an imperfect science that hopefully, I think embedding models don't get as much attention, obviously, as like, the next GPT model that might come out. But, it's very useful for us and very useful for a lot of people, obviously very useful for Pinecone customers. And so we're hopeful that there'll be new companies or existing companies that decide to put more time into embedding models, and we can get to a point where we can just embed larger corpuses of text and not have to chunk them.
So that's actually really interesting and valuable for our audience to learn. So it sounds like for your business, it was most valuable for you to get the largest chunks possible while preserving as much information within those chunks as possible. And you benchmark models against that. So like as you increase chunk size, are you still like how does that affect like maybe CTR or some other metric that you're interested in measuring? And at some point, like that's at a nice balance for you to have as much of the job description in there as possible. Is that correct? Am I summarizing that correctly, or did I mischaracterize that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we try to be as scientific with the process as possible. It's not there's a little bit like anything, I guess, in ML with these like hyperparameters. There's a bit of guesswork that goes into it and a bit of like finger in the air, try and figure out what's working best. But yeah, we're looking at, recall rates, and then the ones that performed well, we put them in and look at click-through rate until we found something that worked well for us. And it's always changing, obviously. There's new embedding models like the new ones OpenAI released, 4 months ago or something like that. So that is always changing. But we try to be as rigorous as possible when evaluating it for the things that were important for us. For other people, the length of the embedding, the number of tokens might not matter as much. But for us, we felt like that was very important.
Cool. We got one more question I'd like for us to touch on. So you've mentioned this before, but I'd like to kind of recap this a little. Liesel is asking about the 3 reasons that you think are most important for you to use Pinecone over an open source vector store. So I know you've mentioned scaling up and scaling down. You probably are using Pinecone serverless to scale up and scale down in order to kind of adjust for these loads, maybe? Could you tell us more about like why you are able to use Pinecone?
Yeah, so we actually still use Pinecone pods. We haven't
Okay,
migrated
same.
to serverless, but I think the plan is to do that before the end of 2024. We're just, like I said, we have times where we have very, very high query throughput. That's still true today. And
Mm.
so want to make sure that we have a good thing going on pods. And before we rip it out and move to serverless, we'd like to make sure everything's going to work exactly right. So that's still something we're working on. But even with pods, um, they're like, yeah, the same advantages I talked about earlier of using Pinecone, where we could have DevOps time not being spent on Pinecone. We could scale up and scale down, only pay for the resources that we needed. And also the number of embeddings, right? Like scaling, not just like creating more replicas to get more query throughput, but also just like bigger instances because we have more embeddings. The job market tends to fluctuate a decent amount, right? The number of job openings goes down, like right now towards the end of the month, right? Or in the summer, especially when less companies are hiring. And then during peak times at the beginning of the month and in certain months, it gets much higher. And so we didn't want to, again, we wanted to focus on the core product, and we didn't want to have to, have half of a resource always, spending all their time scaling up and scaling down, or creating, more replicas or whatever. And so that was a huge thing for us. And the performance, we use P1 pods. The query latency is great. I know things have changed with open source, with like pgvec and some of these other ones since we started using Pinecone. But I think for us at least, that like the query latency and the query throughput is great. The pricing is frankly like not far off from what we would probably pay for the number of instances we would need to run something like this if we were to self-host it. And so all those things added together, it kind of made it a no-brainer, and I think still makes it a no-brainer. Although like we love Pinecone, but yeah, eventually if like pgvec becomes like amazing and is better, then maybe we have to reevaluate. But that's certainly not. We don't feel that way, or it's not close right now for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. I think those are all the questions we got.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
And
been great.
thank you so much for your candid conversation. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your journey, insights, and those bits about Jennie Johnson. I shared the link with the audience to see if they want to try it out. But if they want to learn more about you, if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about Jennie Johnson or anything that Hyperleap does, that where they should go.
Yeah, just you can add me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with anyone. Or yeah, we go. You shared the link for Jennie Johnson. That's great. We'd love for you guys to check it out. We also created a discount code RAGBRAG. If you want to put it in there, you'll get 25% off your
Oh,
first month.
right.
So if you want to do
Awesome.
that, you can. But yeah, feel free to reach out. And yeah, this has been great. Appreciate your guys' time.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for that code. I'm going to keep it for myself too. um,
Nice.
thank you all for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Please stay tuned for more conversations with AI leaders, and we will see you in the next episode. Until then, take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thanks.
Alex.